It's a very exciting day in the workshop today. I've got a new toy! That's better. Now then, those lovely people at Evolution Power Tools have sent me their new circular saw for me to review. Right, what have we got? Let's get everything out of the box. We've got the manual, we've got all that packaging. Let's get that out of the way a second. Here's the saw, let's have a look at this. Bigger than I was expecting. There's some pack here. Okay, so cutting guide, an Allen key, very important for changing blades. Allen keys on. That's everything. Okay. So I've got to say, first impressions, looks good, feels good and solid. Cut steel, aluminium and wood with one saw and one blade. That's a good thing. Okay, so this is the Fury 1B circular saw, and in just a moment I'm going to give you a rundown of some of its features. But first, a word on safety. Wear eye protection, and for God's sake, don't chop your fingers off. That's the safety dealt with, so let's have a look at some of the features then, shall we? Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you is the on-off switch, which is right here. And as you can see, you've got a little push button catch that you have to hold in before you can actually switch the thing on, which is a good little feature. It's pretty standard on this sort of thing, and it just means that you're never going to get the blade powering up accidentally. You can't put it down on the trigger and set it off spinning. Okay, moving around the front we have the blade, and what we have here is the blade guard. And all that does is it keeps the blade covered up apart from when it's actively cutting something. So as the timber approaches from the front here, it'll push the blade back, exposing the teeth so it can do its work. Once the timber's away, it snaps back into place, just keeping everyone as safe as you can. This green lever here, this is a manual release for if you need to have the blade exposed for some reason, maybe you come top down on something. This hole here, this is the exhaust port, so when the sawdust comes off the wood, it spins around here, it flies out of this hole. Best not to get your head in the way of that. In the middle, that's the Allen lock, so that's how you would use your Allen key to take the blade off. But look, it just spins around. Now, there's a nice little feature on this saw. In the olden days, you'd have to put a glove on and grab the blade and try and do that and try not to cut your fingers. But with these, there's a handy little push button here. And what that does, push that in, it locks the blade still. So you can hold that down, get your Allen key, and unscrew it, and it just makes changing your blades that little bit easier and faster and safer. So again, that's a nice little feature. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is just how you're going to set it up to do some cutting, and this all revolves around the base plate here, which can be adjusted in 2 dimensions to do different types of cuts. So the first adjustment you've got is on the front here, which is by this screw. Bit stuck. So if you undo that, what you can do, you can tilt the whole blade, and you've got a reading on this scale here, 0 to 45 degrees. So if you tighten that off at a full 45, when you're working, you're actually going with the blade in this orientation, which is good if you need to do some beveling. So we'll just pop that back for a second. And the other orientation you can set is the blade cut depth, which is adjusted with the screw down this side. So slacken that off, the base plate drops away. And if you can see, there's a scale along the back here, which you can use to set your cut depth in millimetres. So as you can see, this goes up and down, more and more of the blade is exposed. So if you only want a very shallow cut, or you want to cut a little trench in something, that's how you do it. Now the last thing I just want to show you is this, which is the cutting guide. And how this works is you simply slide this into the front, you get a little key to lock it down there, and as you're working, this rests against the far side of the timber you're cutting, and obviously the blade runs through there. So if you keep that tight to the side you're working on, that'll just ensure that you get a nice straight cut. There's a little ruler measurement guide on here as well, which will tell you how wide the piece of work that you're cutting is going to be. Okay, so that's about that. So let's do some test cuts and we'll see how it performs. Okay, so first test, I'm just going to go through a little bit of scrap 3x2. Shouldn't be too difficult. Next up, I'm going to try a 45-degree bevel cut through this little piece of 2x2. Okay, didn't get quite all the way through, but it is a nice clean cut on the inside. What I'm going to demonstrate now is cutting a little notch in this piece of MDF, and this is a useful cut if you're making furniture, because sometimes you'll want a notch just for guiding panels together. So I've set the blade depth to 5mm and let's see how she performs. Okay, there we go. Right, so I'm going to do that same cut again, but this time I'm going to use the cutting guide, and I'm going to show you the difference between how straight your cut is doing it freehand and using the guide. But bear in mind, this edge isn't perfectly straight, so it's not going to be a perfectly straight line. So you can see the difference right there. Okay, so this saw is supposed to be able to cut through steel, aluminium, wood, and various types of plastics. In fact, in the instructions it says it should be able to cut up to 3mm plate steel. Now, I don't have any 3mm plate steel to test it on, but what I do have is this piece of wood I've banged a load of nails and screws into the end of. So let's see how it gets on. Top marks! Okay, so the last test I'm going to do is cutting this plank in half lengthways. Now it's old, it's wet, it might bind, it's got a metal piece on the end, there might be metals or screws in it, or nails. So let's see how we get on. Perfect. No binds along the grain, stayed on course, and it's perfectly straight. I'm going to give that 10 out of 10. So, I've been using this thing for a few hours now, and I've got to say, on the whole, I'm impressed. If you're a beginner to woodworking or upcycling, then this is going to do everything you want a circular saw to do. It ticks all the bases. What I will say as well is, if you are starting out and you're buying your tools, then circular saw has got to be one of your absolute first purchases. It's nice to have a chop saw, it's nice to have a table saw, but most things that you're going to want to do you'll be able to achieve with this if you learn how to use it properly. A couple of little things that I didn't like about it. First one being, I would have liked there to have been a dust bag rather than just an exhaust port, because I live in Wales and it rains 13 months of the year here, and most of the time I end up working inside. The other thing is a small thing, is to do with the cutting guide, which, if you look closely, there is a ruler on the cutting guide itself, which you can read off against a notch that's marked on the base plate here. This tells you exactly how far your cutting disc is from the guide, which basically tells you how wide the piece of wood that you're cutting is going to be, which I think is a very nice feature. But for me, I'm a left-hander. I do tend to do things on the left generally, and also you need to use it on this side sometimes if you want a wider cut than just here. There's a notch on this side to mark off the distance, which I think is a bit of a shame, because it would have been an easy thing for them to do, just to stamp a notch onto the metal. But it's only a little thing. On the whole, it's a great piece of kit. I'm happy with it. So that's the Fury 1B. If you want to click to part 2 of this video, you're going to see me doing a project build using this very tool. And if you don't want to click to part 2, you're missing out, aren't you?